The girl appeared at the edge of Caleb Hart's ranch just as the sun was bleeding into the horizon, turning the desert sky the color of old copper. Caleb had been fixing a broken fence when he noticed her, small, still, and watching him as if she were part of the land itself. She stood barefoot in the dust, her dress torn, her dark hair tangled by wind and time. She didn't wave or call out. She simply waited, eyes steady and alert, carrying a silence that felt heavier than fear. Caleb approached slowly, hands open, knowing better than to startle a child who had learned to survive alone. When he offered her his canteen, she hesitated only a moment before drinking, careful and controlled, as if she knew exactly how much she could afford to trust. He gave her a piece of bread, and she ate it slowly, not like a starving child, but like someone who had learned to stretch every bite. Through broken English and hand gestures, he learned her name was Naya. She was Apache. She had been traveling with her mother in a small group when chaos scattered. Them, gunfire, horses, dust. After that, only silence. Night was coming fast, and the desert was no place for a child alone. Caleb had lived most of his life by simple rules. Mind your land, mind your business. But as he looked at the girl standing in front of him, he knew leaving her there would haunt him for the rest of his days. He led her to the ranch house, unsure whether she would follow. She did, keeping a careful distance, her eyes noting every movement, every sound. Inside, the house felt warmer than it had in years. Caleb gave her an old blanket and poured stew into a bowl. She sat at the table like a guest who didn't know how long her welcome would last. He spoke gently, telling her she could stay until her people were found, even if he wasn't sure how that would happen. She listened, nodding once, her face unreadable but her shoulders easing slightly. Days passed, then weeks. Naya spoke little, but she observed everything. She learned the rhythms of ranch life quickly, helping with small chores, feeding the chickens, brushing the horses with a natural ease that surprised Caleb. At night, she sat by the fire, staring into the flames with an expression far older than her years. Caleb never pushed her to talk. He knew some wounds needed time more than questions. The neighbors noticed, of course. Whispers followed him into town, warnings mixed with suspicion. An Apache child on a lone ranch was bound to bring trouble, they said. Caleb ignored them. He had lost his own family years ago, and the quiet presence of this girl filled a space he hadn't realized was still bleeding. One evening, as coyotes howled in the distance, Naya asked softly if she could stay. Not until tomorrow. Not until her people came. Stay. Caleb answered without hesitation. In that moment, he didn't know he was adopting a child whose past carried blood, legend, and unfinished stories. He only knew that a lost girl had found her way to HE. The years moved forward quietly, measured by changing seasons and the steady growth of the girl. Caleb had taken in as his own. Naya no longer hovered at the edges of the ranch like a shadow. She walked its land with confidence, riding beside Caleb at dawn, her posture straight, her gaze sharp and thoughtful. Childhood fell away from her naturally, replaced by a calm strength that drew attention wherever she went. In town, people noticed her beauty first, then the dignity in the way she carried herself, and finally the unmistakable Apache fire in her eyes. Caleb watched this change with mixed emotions. To him, Naya was still the quiet child who had arrived at dusk, but he knew the world would never see her that way again. He taught her to read and write in the evenings, their heads bent over old books by lamplight. In return, she taught him things he had never learned from any man: how to read the wind before a storm, how to recognize animal tracks at a glance, how to sit in silence without feeling empty. Their bond was not spoken of often, but it ran deep, built on trust rather than blood. One afternoon, as the heat pressed down hard on the land, a small group of Apache riders appeared near the ranch. Caleb's hand went instinctively to his rifle, but Naya stepped forward, her expression composed. Among them was an elderly man whose eyes widened the moment he saw her. He spoke her name slowly, as if afraid it might vanish on his tongue. The conversation that followed was long and heavy, filled with pauses and quiet grief. From him, the truth finally emerged. Naya was not just any lost child. She was the daughter of a respected Apache widow, a woman remembered for her striking beauty and unbreakable spirit. After her husband's death, the widow had led her family with pride and independence, earning both admiration and resentment. When violence erupted along the borderlands, she had been killed, and Naya's disappearance became a wound that never healed among her people. Some believed the girl was dead. Others believed she had been taken, her fate unknown. The knowledge struck Naya like a sudden storm. The fragments of memory she had carried, her mother's voice, the weight of her jewelry in her small hands, the urgency of running finally found their place. She was not simply an orphan rescued by chance. She was the living blood of a woman whose name still carried power. The elder offered to take her back, to return her to her people, where her identity and history would be honored. That night, Caleb sat alone on the porch, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had always known this day might come, that the past would eventually reach for her. When Naya joined him, her face calm but her eyes full. She told him she wasn't leaving, not now. She said the ranch was where she had grown, where she had been given a future instead of a grave. She would honor her mother's legacy in her own way. Caleb nodded, pride and fear tightening in his chest. Trouble did not arrive suddenly. It drifted in on rumors, carried by riders who spoke too quietly in town and by uneasy looks that followed Naya wherever she went. Caleb sensed it before he saw it, the way a man who has lived long with the land senses a storm before the clouds gather. Naya felt it too. The stories of her mother, once buried in silence, had begun to circulate again, and with them came old anger that refused to rest. The men arrived one early morning, their horses lathered, their expressions hard with purpose. They stopped at the edge of the ranch as if testing the ground itself. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed toward the earth. Naya walked past him, calm and unafraid, the wind lifting her hair as she faced them. In that moment, she did not look like the lost child he had once found. She looked like someone who knew exactly who she was. They spoke of debts, of blood spilled long ago, of a widow whose name still burned in their memories. They claimed Naya carried that past and must answer for it. Caleb felt anger rise, sharp and protective. But before he could speak, Naya raised her hand. Her voice was steady when she answered, carrying across the open land without force or fear. She told them she knew her mother's story, knew the pain and the injustice, but she would not live as a vessel for revenge. She had been raised by a man who chose compassion over hatred, and she would honor both sides of her life by refusing to let violence define her future. The words unsettled them more than any weapon could have. Silence stretched long and uncomfortable. One by one, the men looked away, their certainty shaken. Finally, without another threat, they turned their horses and rode off, leaving behind nothing but dust and echoes. When they were gone, Naya's strength faltered. She stood still for a moment, then the weight of years finally reached her. Tears came quietly, and Caleb pulled her into an embrace, holding her the way he had when she was small, the way a father does when there are no answers left to give. She thanked him then, not just for saving her life, but for giving her the freedom to choose who she would become. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became a place of unexpected connection. Apache visitors came not with suspicion, but with respect. Townsfolk who once whispered began to speak openly, seeing in Naya not a threat, but a bridge between two worlds that had long refused to understand each other. She moved with confidence now, her beauty noticed but secondary to the calm authority she carried. Naya chose to stay near the ranch, building a life that honored her mother's memory without being trapped by it. Caleb watched her with quiet pride, knowing that adoption had not changed her destiny, only strengthened it. Years later, as the sun set once more over the same land where he had first seen a lost girl standing, alone, Caleb understood that what they had built together was more than family. Time softened the sharp edges of the past, but it never erased them completely. As Naya stepped fully into adulthood, the weight of her lineage continued to follow her like a long shadow at sunset. She had chosen peace, yet peace required work, patience, and courage of a different kind. The ranch slowly transformed into a meeting ground where old enemies learned to share space, without reaching for weapons. It was not something Naya announced or planned. It simply happened because of the way she listened, spoke, and carried herself with quiet authority. Caleb aged faster than the land around him. His hands stiffened, his steps slowed, and the long days of hard labor became fewer. Naya noticed before he said anything. She took on more responsibility without asking, managing the ranch with the same discipline and intuition she had learned from both worlds. She negotiated cattle trades, handled disputes, and earned respect from men who once doubted her place there. To them, she was no longer just the Apache widow's daughter or the girl raised by a cowboy. She was a woman who belonged. One autumn evening, a young Apache family arrived seeking shelter. Their story echoed Naya's own: loss, fear, and nowhere safe to go. Caleb watched as Naya welcomed them without hesitation, offering food, blankets, and reassurance. It struck him then how the cycle had turned. The child he had saved was now becoming a protector herself, extending the same mercy that had once changed her fate. The past tested her one final time when a government agent arrived with papers and promises, speaking of land claims and forced relocations. The tension was thick, old wounds threatening to reopen. Naya stood firm, refusing intimidation. She spoke with clarity and resolve, citing agreements, boundaries, and the shared history of bloodshed that no one wished to repeat. Her strength did not come from anger, but from understanding. The agent left with no victory, only the realization that this land was no longer defended by guns alone. Caleb fell ill that winter. The strong man who once rode, for days without rest now spent, mornings wrapped in blankets near the fire. Naya stayed by his side, reading aloud, cooking meals, and caring for him with a tenderness that mirrored everything he had given her. One night, as the wind rattled the windows, he told her he had never regretted the moment he chose to bring her inside. He said she had given his life meaning long after he thought it was over. When Caleb passed, the land mourned quietly. Neighbors, ranchers, and Apache families gathered together, standing side by side in a silence that would have been impossible years earlier. Naya buried him beneath a cottonwood tree overlooking the ranch, a place where he could rest facing the horizon he loved. She remained there, not alone but rooted. The ranch lived on through her, not as a symbol of ownership, but as a promise that compassion could outlast violence, that identity could be whole.